brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. George Harrison. George Harrison was an English guitarist, singer, songwriter, and music and film producer who achieved international fame as the lead guitarist of the Beatles. Often referred to as the Quiet Beatle, Harrison embraced Hinduism and helped broaden the horizons of his fellow Beatles as well as the Western audience by incorporating Indian instrumentation in their music. Although most of the Beatles' songs were written by John Lennon and Paul McCartney, most Beatles albums from 1965 onwards contained at least 2 Harrison compositions. His songs for the group included Taxman, Within You Without You, While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Here Comes the Sun, and Something, the last of which became the Beatles' second most covered song. Harrison's earliest musical influences included George Formby and Django Reinhardt. Carl Perkins, Chet Atkins and Chuck Berry were subsequent influences. By 1965 he had begun to lead the Beatles into folk rock through his interest in the Byrds and Bob Dylan, and towards Indian classical music through his use of the sitar on Norwegian Wood. Having initiated the band's embracing of transcendental meditation in 1967, he subsequently developed an association with the Hare Krishna movement. After the band's breakup in 1970, Harrison released the triple album All Things Must Pass, a critically acclaimed work that produced his most successful hit single, My Sweet Lord, and introduced his signature sound as a solo artist, the slide guitar. He also organized the 1971 concert for Bangladesh with Indian musician Ravi Shankar, a precursor for later benefit concerts such as Live Aid. In his role as a music and film producer, Harrison produced acts signed to the Beatles' Apple record label before founding Dark Horse Records in 1974. and co-founding Handmade Films in 1978. Harrison released several best-selling singles and albums as a solo performer, and in 1988 co-founded the platinum-selling supergroup The Traveling Wilburys. A prolific recording artist, he was featured as a guest guitarist on tracks by Badfinger, Ronnie Wood and Billy Preston, and collaborated on songs and music with Dylan, Eric Clapton, Ringo Starr and Tom Petty, among others. Rolling Stone magazine ranked him number 11 in the list of the 100 greatest guitarists of all time. He is a 2-time Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee, as a member of the Beatles in 1988, and for his solo career in 2004. Harrison's first marriage, to model Pattie Boyd in 1966, ended in divorce in 1977. The following year he married Olivia Harrison, with whom he had one son, Darnie. Harrison died in 2001, aged 58, from lung cancer. He was cremated, and his ashes were scattered in the Ganges and Yamuna rivers in India, in a private ceremony according to Hindu tradition. He left an estate of almost £100 million. Early years, 1943 to 1957. Born in Liverpool on 25 February 1943. Harrison was the youngest of 4 children of Harold Hargreaves Harrison and his wife Louise. He had one sister, Louise, and 2 brothers, Harry and Peter. His mother was a shop assistant from a Catholic family with Irish roots, and his father was a bus conductor who had worked as a ship's steward on the White Star Line. His future wife, the model Pattie Boyd, described Harrison's parents as quite short and very Liverpudlian. According to Boyd, Harrison's mother was particularly supportive. All she wanted for her children is that they should be happy, and she recognized that nothing made George quite as happy as making music, and enthusiastic music. fan, she was known among friends for her loud singing voice, which at times startled visitors by rattling the Harrisons' windows. While pregnant with George, she often listened to the weekly broadcast Radio India. Harrison's biographer Joshua Green wrote, "Every Sunday she tuned into mystical sounds evoked by sitars and tablas, hoping that the exotic music would bring peace and calm to the baby in the womb." Harrison was born and lived the first 6 years of his life at 12 Arnold Grove, Wavertree, Liverpool, a terraced house in a dead-end street. The home had an outdoor toilet and its only heat came from a single coal fire. In 1949 the family were offered a council house and moved to 25 Upton Green, Speke. In 1948, at the age of 5, Harrison enrolled at Dovedale Primary School. He passed the 11+ exam and attended Liverpool Institute High School for Boys from 1954 to 1959. Though the institute did offer a music course, Harrison was disappointed with the absence of guitars, and felt the school molded students into being frightened. Harrison's earliest musical influences included George Formby, Cab Calloway, Django Reinhardt, and Hoagy Carmichael. By the 1950s, Carl Perkins and Lonnie Donegan were significant influences. In early 1956 he had an epiphany while riding his bicycle. He heard Elvis Presley's Heartbreak Hotel playing from a nearby house, and the song piqued his interest in rock and roll. He often sat at the back of the class drawing guitars in his school books, and later commented, "I was totally into guitars." Harrison cited Slim Whitman as another early influence. "The first person I ever saw playing a guitar was Slim Whitman, either a photo of him in a magazine or live on television." Guitars were definitely coming in. Although apprehensive about his son's interest in pursuing a music career, in late 1956 Harrison's father bought him a Dutch Egmond flat-top acoustic guitar. A friend of his father's taught Harrison how to play Whispering, Sweet Sue and Dinah, and inspired by Donegan's music, Harrison formed a skiffle group called the Rebels with his brother Peter and a friend, Arthur Kelly. On the bus to school, Harrison met Paul McCartney, who also attended the Liverpool Institute, and the pair bonded over their shared love of music. The Beatles, 1958 to 1970. Harrison became part of the Beatles when they were still a skiffle group called the Quarrymen, with McCartney and John Lennon as members. McCartney told Lennon about his friend George Harrison, who could play "Raunchy" on his guitar. In March 1958, Harrison auditioned for the Quarrymen at Rory Storm's Morgue Skiffle Club, playing Arthur Guitar Boogie Smith's Guitar Boogie Shuffle, but Lennon felt that Harrison, having just turned 15, was too young to join the band. During a second meeting, arranged by McCartney, he performed the lead guitar part for the instrumental "Raunchy" on the upper deck of a Liverpool bus. He began socializing with the group, filling in on guitar as needed, and became accepted as a member. Although his father wanted him to continue his education, Harrison left school at 16 and worked for several months as an apprentice electrician at Blackler's, a local department store. During the group's first tour of Scotland, in 1960, Harrison used the pseudonym Carl Harrison in reference to Carl Perkins. In 1960, promoter Alan Williams arranged for the band, now calling themselves the Beatles, to play at the Kaiserkeller Club in Hamburg, owned by Bruno Koschmider. The impromptu musical education Harrison received while playing long hours with the Beatles, as well as the guitar lessons he took from Tony Sheridan while they briefly served as his backing group, laid the foundations of his sound and of his quiet, professional role within the group. He was later known as the Quiet Beatle. The band's first residency in Hamburg ended prematurely when Harrison was deported for being too young to work in nightclubs. When Brian Epstein became their manager in December 1961, he polished their image and secured them a recording contract with EMI. The group's first single, Love Me Do, peaked at number 17 on the record retailer chart, and by the time their debut album, Please Please Me, was released in early 1963, Beatlemania had arrived. Their second album, with the Beatles, included Don't Bother Me, Harrison's first solo writing credit. By 1965's Rubber Soul, Harrison had begun to lead the other Beatles into folk rock through his interest in the Byrds and Bob Dylan, and towards Indian classical music through his use of the sitar on Norwegian Wood. He later called Rubber Soul his favorite Beatles album. Revolver included 3 of his compositions, Taxman, Love You Too and I Want to Tell You. His introduction of the drone-like tambour part on Lennon's Tomorrow Never Knows exemplified the band's ongoing exploration of non-Western instruments. The tabla-driven Love You Too was the Beatles' first genuine foray into Indian music, according to the ethnomusicologist David Reck. The song set a precedent in popular music as an example of Asian culture being represented by Westerners respectfully and without parody. Harrison continued to develop his interest in non-Western instrumentation, playing Swarmandal on Strawberry Fields Forever. By late 1966, Harrison's interests had moved away from the Beatles, as reflected in his choice of Eastern gurus and religious leaders for inclusion on the album cover for Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band in 1967. His sole composition on the album was the Indian-inspired Within You Without You, to which no other Beatle contributed. He played sitar and tambura on the track, backed by musicians from the London Asian Music Circle on Dilruba, Swarmandal and tabla. He later commented on the Sgt. Pepper album, "It was a millstone and a milestone in the music industry. There's about half the songs I like, and the other half I can't stand." In 1968, his song, The Inner Light, was recorded at Emma's studio in Bombay, featuring a group of local musicians playing traditional Indian instruments. Released as the B-side to McCartney's Lady Madonna, it was the first Harrison composition to appear on a Beatles single, derived from a quotation from the Tao Te Ching. The song's lyric reflected Harrison's deepening interest in Hinduism and meditation, while musically it embraced the Carnatic discipline of Indian music, rather than the Hindustani style of his previous work in the genre. During the recording of the Beatles that same year, tensions within the group ran high, and drummer Ringo Starr quit briefly. Harrison's songwriting contributions to the double album included While My Guitar Gently Weeps, which featured Eric Clapton on lead guitar, Piggies, Long, Long, Long and Savoy Truffle. Dylan and the band were a major musical influence on Harrison at the end of his career with the Beatles. While on a visit to Woodstock in late 1968, he established a friendship with Dylan and found himself drawn to the band's sense of communal music making and to the creative equality among the band members, which contrasted with Lennon and McCartney's domination of the Beatles' songwriting and creative direction. This coincided with a prolific period in his songwriting and a growing desire to assert his independence from the Beatles, tensions among whom surfaced again in January 1969. During the filming of rehearsals at Twickenham Studios for what became the album Let It Be, frustrated by the poor working conditions in the cold and sterile film studio, as well as by what he perceived as Lennon's creative disengagement from the Beatles and a domineering attitude from McCartney. Harrison quit the group on the 10th of January, but agreed to return 12 days later. Relations among the Beatles were more cordial, though still strained, during sessions for their final recorded album, Abbey Road. The LP included two of Harrison's most respected Beatles compositions, Here Comes the Sun and Something, which became one half of the Beatles' first #1 double A-side single, Harrison's first A-side, and the first Harrison song to reach the top of the charts. In 1969, Frank Sinatra recorded Something and later dubbed it the greatest love song of the past 50 years. Lennon considered it the best song on Abbey Road, and it became the Beatles' second most covered song after Yesterday. Author Peter Lavezzoli wrote, Harrison would finally achieve equal songwriting status with his two classic contributions to the final Beatles LP. In April 1970, when Harrison's For You Blue was released in America as a double A-side with McCartney's The Long and Winding Road, it became the band's second chart-topping double A-side, and For You Blue became Harrison's second #1 hit. His increased productivity and the Beatles' reluctance to include his songs on their albums meant that by the time of their breakup he had amassed a stockpile of unreleased compositions. While Harrison grew as a songwriter, his compositional presence on Beatles albums remained limited to 2 or 3 songs, increasing his frustration and significantly contributing to the band's breakup. Harrison's last recording session with the Beatles was on the 4th of January 1970. When he, McCartney and Starr recorded the Harrison song, I Me Mine. Early solo work, 1968, 1969. Before the Beatles' breakup, Harrison had already recorded and released 2 solo albums, Wonderwall Music and Electronic Sound, both of which contain mainly instrumental compositions. Wonderwall Music, a soundtrack to the 1968 film Wonderwall, blends Indian and Western instrumentation, while Electronic Sound is an experimental album that prominently features a Moog synthesizer. Released in November 1968, Wonderwall Music was the first solo album by a Beatle, and the first LP released by Apple Records. Indian musicians Ashish Khan and Shiv Kumar Sharma performed on the album, which contains the experimental sound collage Dream Scene, recorded several months before Lennon's Revolution 9. In December 1969, Harrison participated in a brief tour of Europe with the American group Delaney and Bonnie and Friends. During the tour that included Clapton, Bobby Whitlock, drummer Jim Gordon, and band leaders Delaney and Bonnie Bramlett, Harrison began to write My Sweet Lord, which became his first single as a solo artist. Delaney Bramlett inspired Harrison to learn slide guitar, significantly influencing his later music. All Things Must Pass, 1970. After years of being restricted in his songwriting contributions to the Beatles albums, Harrison released All Things Must Pass, a triple album with 2 discs of his songs, and the third of recordings of Harrison jamming with friends. Regarded by many as his best work, the album topped the charts on both sides of the Atlantic. The LP produced the #1 hit single, My Sweet Lord, and the top 10 single, What Is Life. The album was co-produced by Phil Spector using his Wall of Sound approach, and the musicians included Starr, Clapton, Gary Wright, Preston, Klaus Voormann, the whole of Delaney and Bonnie's Friends band, and the Apple group Badfinger. On release, All Things Must Pass was received with critical acclaim. Ben Gerson of Rolling Stone described it as being of classic Spectorian proportions, Wagnerian, Brucknerian, the music of mountain tops and vast horizons. Author and musicologist Ian Inglis considers the lyrics of the album's title track a recognition of the impermanence of human existence, a simple and poignant conclusion to Harrison's former band. In 1971, Bright Tunes sued Harrison for copyright infringement over My Sweet Lord, owing to its similarity to the 1963 Chiffons hit, Ain't She's So Fine. When the case was heard in the United States District Court in 1976, he denied deliberately plagiarizing the song, but lost the case as the judge ruled that he had done so subconsciously. In 2000, Apple Records released a 30th anniversary edition of the album, and Harrison actively participated in its promotion, giving an interview, during which he reflected on the work. "It's just something that was like my continuation from the Beatles, really. It was me sort of getting out of the Beatles and just going my own way. It was a very happy occasion." He commented on the production, "Well, in those days it was like the reverb was kind of used a bit more than what I would do now. In fact, I don't use reverb at all. I can't stand it. You know, it's hard to go back to anything 30 years later and expect it to be how you would want it now." The Concert for Bangladesh, 1971. Responding to a request from Ravi Shankar, Harrison organized a charity event, the Concert for Bangladesh, which took place on 1 August 1971, drawing over 40,000 people to two shows in New York's Madison Square Garden. The goal of the event was to raise money to aid starving refugees during the Bangladesh Liberation War. Shankar opened the show, which featured popular musicians such as Dylan, Clapton, Leon Russell, Badfinger, Preston, and Starr. A triple album, The Concert for Bangladesh, was released by Apple Corps that year, followed by a concert film in 1972. Tax troubles and questionable expenses later tied up many of the proceeds. But Harrison commented, "Mainly the concert was to attract attention to the situation. The money we raised was secondary, and although we had some money problems, they still got plenty, even though it was a drop in the ocean. The main thing was, we spread the word, and helped get the war ended." The event has been described as an innovative precursor for the large-scale charity rock shows that followed, including Live Aid. Living in the Material World to George Harrison, 1973 to 1979. Harrison would not again release an album that matched the critical and commercial achievements of All Things Must Pass. However, his next solo album, 1973's Living in the Material World, held the #1 spot on the Billboard album chart for 5 weeks, and the album's single, Give Me Love, also reached #1 in the US. In the UK, the LP achieved #2, spending 12 weeks on the charts with the single peaking at #8. The album was lavishly produced and packaged, and its dominant message was Harrison's Hindu beliefs. In Green's opinion, it contained many of the strongest compositions of his career. Stephen Holden, writing in Rolling Stone, felt the album was vastly appealing and profoundly seductive, and that it stood alone as an article of faith, miraculous in its radiance. Other reviewers were less enthusiastic, describing the release as awkward, sanctimonious and overly sentimental, a reaction that left Harrison despondent. In November 1974, Harrison began his 45-date Dark Horse tour, becoming the first ex-Beatle to tour North America. In addition to performances by Harrison, with an ensemble of musicians such as Preston, Tom Scott, Willie Weeks, Andy Newmark, and Jim Horn. The tour also included traditional and contemporary Indian music performed by Ravi Shankar, family and friends. Despite numerous positive reviews, the consensus reaction to the tour was negative, with complaints about the content, structure, and length. The show's duration of 2.5 hours was seen as excessive at the time. Some fans found Shankar's significant presence a bizarre disappointment, having expected to see only Harrison perform, and many were affronted by what Inglis described as Harrison's sermonizing. Further, he reworked the lyrics to several Beatles songs, and some of the substitutions were seen as gratuitously offensive. His laryngitis-affected vocals also disappointed fans and critics, who began calling the tour "Dark Horse." Harrison was so deeply bothered by the caustic backlash that he did not tour again until the 1990s. The author Robert Rodriguez commented, "While the Dark Horse tour might be considered a noble failure, there were a number of fans who were tuned into what was being attempted. They went away ecstatic, conscious that they had just witnessed something so uplifting that it could never be repeated." Simon Leng called the tour groundbreaking and revolutionary in its presentation of Indian music. In December, Harrison released Dark Horse, an album that earned him the least favorable reviews of his career. Rolling Stone called it the chronicle of a performer out of his element, working to a deadline, enfeebling his overtaxed talents by a rush to deliver a new LP product, rehearse a band, and assemble a cross-country tour, all within 3 weeks. The album reached number 4 on the Billboard chart, and the single, Dark Horse, reached number 15, but they failed to make an impact in the UK. The music critic Michael Gilmore described Dark Horse as one of Harrison's most fascinating works, a record about change and loss. Harrison's final studio album for EMI and Apple Records was the soul music-inspired Extra Texture. He considered it the least satisfactory of the 3 he had recorded since All Things Must Pass. Leng identified bitterness and dismay in many of the album's tracks. His longtime friend Klaus Voormann commented, "He wasn't up for it. It was a terrible time, because I think there was a lot of cocaine going around, and that's when I got out of the picture. I didn't like his frame of mind." He released 2 singles from the LP, You, which reached the Billboard Top 20, and This Guitar, Apple's final original single release. 33 1/3. Harrison's first album release on his own Dark Horse Records label produced the hit singles, This Song and Crackerbox Palace, both of which reached the top 25 in the US. The surreal humor of Crackerbox Palace reflected Harrison's association with Monty Python's Eric Idle, who directed a comical music video for the song, with an emphasis on melody and musicianship, and a more subtle subject matter than the pious message of his earlier works. 33 1/3 earned Harrison his most favorable critical notices in the US since All Things Must Pass. In 1979, following his second marriage and the birth of his son Darnie, he released George Harrison. The album and the single, Blow Away, both made the Billboard Top 20. The album marked the beginning of Harrison's gradual retreat from the music business and the fruition of ideas introduced on All Things Must Pass. In 1978, the death of his father in May and the birth of his son in August had influenced his decision to devote more time to his family than to his career. Leng described the album as melodic and lush, peaceful, the work of a man who had lived the rock and roll dream twice over and was now embracing domestic as well as spiritual bliss. Somewhere in England to Cloud 9, 1980 to 1987. The murder of Lennon on 8 December 1980 disturbed Harrison and reinforced his decades-long concerns about stalkers. It was also a deep personal loss. Although unlike McCartney and Starr, Harrison had little contact with Lennon in the years before his death. Following the murder, Harrison commented, "After all we went through together, I had and still have great love and respect for John Lennon. I am shocked and stunned." Harrison modified the lyrics of a song he had written for Starr to make it a tribute song to Lennon. All those years ago, which included vocal contributions from Paul and Linda McCartney, as well as Starr's original drum part, peaked at number 2 in the US charts. The single was included on the album Somewhere in England in 1981. Harrison did not release any new albums for 5 years after 1982's Gone Troppo received little notice from critics or the public. During this period he made several guest appearances, including a 1985 performance at a tribute to Carl Perkins titled Blue Suede Shoes, a rockabilly session. In March 1986 he made a surprise appearance during the finale of the Birmingham Heartbeat charity concert, an event organized to raise money for the Birmingham Children's Hospital. The following year, he appeared at the Prince's Trust concert at London's Wembley Arena, performing While My Guitar Gently Weeps and Here Comes the Sun. In February 1987 he joined Dylan, John Fogerty, and Jesse A. Davis on stage for a 2-hour performance with the blues musician Taj Mahal. Harrison recalled, "Bob rang me up and asked if I wanted to come out for the evening and see Taj Mahal. So we went there and had a few of these Mexican beers and had a few more." Bob says, "Hey, why don't we all get up and play? And you can sing." But every time I got near the microphone, Dylan comes up and just starts singing this rubbish in my ear, trying to throw me. In November 1987, Harrison released the platinum album Cloud 9, co-produced with Jeff Lynne of Electric Light Orchestra. The LP included Harrison's rendition of James Ray's "Got My Mind Set on You," which went to number 1 in the US and number 2 in the UK. The accompanying music video received substantial airplay, and another single, When We Was Fab, a retrospective of the Beatles' career, earned 2 MTV Music Video Awards nominations in 1988. Recorded at his estate in Friar Park, Harrison's slide guitar playing featured prominently on the album, which included several of his longtime musical collaborators, including Clapton, Jim Keltner, and Jim Horn, who recalled Harrison's relaxed and friendly demeanor during the sessions. "George made you feel at home, in his home. He once had me sit on a toilet and play my soprano sax, and they mic'd it at the end of the hall for a distant sound. I thought they were kidding. Another time he stopped me in the middle of a sax solo and brought me 3 p.m. tea. Again I thought he was kidding." Cloud 9 reached number 8 and number 10 on the US and UK charts respectively, and several tracks from the album achieved placement on Billboard's mainstream rock chart, Devil's Radio, This Is Love and Cloud 9. Thank you for watching. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Please like and subscribe below. Please like and subscribe below.